If you've recently become a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe but are unsure of the original stories that have become the reason why this superhero franchise has flourished so much, then this video is for you. We've brought for you 11 comics you can read to prepare for Morbius. First, we have A Man Called Morbius. We're diving right in, begin with the most popular of comics and one that may be the most relevant to the plot of the film. It is Morbius the Living Vampire, number 1 to 9. This comic was focused on Morbius's journey into the new millennium. In the comic, Morbius hopes to avoid his bloodlust completely after having broken out from the prison for supervillains. Morbius ends up making new allies along the way, and when a terrifying new threat emerges in the city, he has to decide on what is more important: avoiding his thirst for blood and allowing himself to be a hero versus failing, losing the new friends he makes by being exposed as a vampire. Who wouldn't want to read this comic? Next is Cure Searching. Vita Ayala, along with Marcelo Burrieta, have created the most recent addition to the world of Morbius. It is what is referred to as Morbius number 1 to 5, and it has the miserable vampire searching for a cure for what he is. In this story, his condition continues to get worse because the hunger continuously escalates. We're hopeful that Leto's Morbius undergoes some leveling up of the same nature from the comic, because in this edition, Morbius actually takes on the appearance of a bat. We wish this moment was added in the film because Leto did mention several transformations taking place in the film in an interview. Next on the list is Morbius vs. Crewman. Okay, so reportedly the film will be utilizing Morbius's first appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man number 101 to 102, which was written and drawn by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. In the issue, an origin story to our supervillain is given. He first appears to be a terrifying monster, only to be humanized towards the end, as the readers are given a detailed account into what caused him so much pain and ultimately led him to become the villain, which obviously makes sense in a film about Morbius. From what we know so far, Morbius this time is a Nobel Prize winner who suffers from a rare disease which impacts his blood. The man thinks it's best to use the DNA of vampire bats to find himself a cure, but instead turns into the living vampire, becomes violent, and ends up massacring an entire personnel present on a transport vehicle he's on. And thus, Spider-Man becomes involved. Spidey meets the Doctor because they both seek refuge in the same building. In the trailer, Tyrese Gibson, playing Simon Stroud, talks about Morbius being found on board a ship with all the crew dead. This gives us hope. This storyline is a lot more involved in the film. Now we have the consequences of collateral damage. In Jerry Conway and Russ Andrews' Marvel team-up number 3, Morbius ends up biting Jefferson Bolt after he's defeated by Spider-Man and washes ashore somewhere else in New York. Jefferson turns into a vampire and then decides to use his new powers to wreak havoc on the city and get involved in criminal activity. We'd love to see this storyline added in the film because this is the most amazing instance of a villain turned hero realizing his mistake. Recognizing that his actions can be serious damage to the world around him, he ends up teaming up with not only Spidey but also the Human Torch. Up next, Loxias Crown, the perfect antagonist. In John Romita Jr. and Howard Mackey's Spider-Man numbers 79 and 80, Hydra agent Loxias Crown kidnaps Morbius in order to study him. Undoubtedly, the vampire takes offense. He fights Crown in the middle of an enormous explosion. Spider-Man intervenes, but the two men disappear, with Morbius drowning Crown of his blood before leaving. This storyline's important because every single hero needs a primary villain who could challenge the protagonist in the perfect way. Crown can be that for Morbius. The role of Loxias Crown is going to be played by Matt Smith of Doctor Who, and we're here for it. Next, the transformation of Crown. Of course, Morbius's act of vengeance causes a whole lot of trouble when it ends up a rather disastrous consequence that he did not anticipate, let alone intend. Crown becomes a living vampire too. He takes on the name Hunger in Peter Parker Spider-Man numbers 4 to 7, and even though Morbius doesn't actually appear in the comics and Hunger is actually dealt with Spider-Man and Eric Brooks, or Blade, sure, these two characters will not be appearing in the Morbius film, but this comic issue will give the viewers an idea into what Crown is like as a villain. We are unsure if Crown will be turning into Hunger in the movie, but he definitely appears to be the only villain or antagonist opposite Jared Leto's Morbius. Now we have You Never Forget Your First. There are a lot of horror fans in the world, and MCU hasn't really done a lot in that department. Of course, this may be changing soon. With what Moon Knight and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness releasing and attempting to tap into this new audience, Mark Frederick and Paul Galassi gave Morbius his first featured role, and and it led issues from numbers 20 to 31. The comic is kind of like a mini-universe in itself because Morbius's previously related characters aren't mentioned in these issues. We're hoping for this to get an homage in the film. Next on the list, Simon Stroud, the Vampire Hunter. The issues of Adventures into Fear, specifically from numbers 27 to 31, shows the CIA agent as he pursues Morbius in New York, and it basically showcases Stroud's relationship with a vampire. The agent's role in Marvel's horror arena is very well established because previously he also hunted down Wolfman. Played by Tyrese Gibson in the film, Stroud's going to be portrayed as a friend or an ally of the Doctor, reaching out and helping him during his episodes of Bloodthirst. We're looking forward to the relationship between the two playing itself out on screen. Next up, the first starring role for the vampire. It was Vampire Tales that boasted Morbius as the main attraction. For the first time ever, he's the one of the most well-known vampires, even though the mass audiences are not that well versed with his stories in life. Beginning with issue numbers 1 to 5, the character returns for numbers 7 and 8, then again for 10 and 11 throughout the comic's run. This comic is told in black and white and is definitely a horror story through and through. We're looking forward to hopefully having the film be inspired by it and at least set a similar tone during the parts where Morbius hunts down the crewmen on board with him right after he transforms into a bloodthirsty monster. Next, we have the first ever series using Morbius's name. Morbius, the living vampire, was created in the early 90s as a comic that exemplified the artistic style of that period of time. In this first ever self-titled book, Morbius actually reinvents himself, becoming a true anti-hero. The inspiration for this was drawn from characters like Deadpool or Cable. The film features the comic's interpretation in a scene where Morbius wears a similar coat, having purple coloring underneath a black exterior. Speaking of the aesthetics back in the 90s, comic books during that era were filled with subdued coloring worn by gritty heroes, and we're likely to see several parallels to this in the film, at least in terms of optics. Next, Morbius helping the Lizard. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 671 to 691, written initially by Dan Slott and illustrated by Humberto Ramos, Morbius comes together with the Lizard as he goes incognito to search for a cure for both himself and Professor Kurt Connors. This made for an interesting story with Spidey being desperate, trying to uncover what Morbius is up to without even being certain if it is him. Why the storyline is essential before watching the film is because it introduced the readers to the character of Max Modell, who is a possible contender for the role Jared Harris might be playing in the film. In the comics, Modell is sort of a mentor to Morbius, and we're hoping to see his influence on the vampire being expanded in the film. There you go, 11 comics, as promised. We're hoping you'll fall in love with Morbius just as the rest of the comic books fans. That's a wrap for this video. Are you going to read any of these comics, and which storyline are you most excited to explore? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.